I'm going to show you how I attach the binding to the back of my quilt with hand stitching. I take some thread and I thread it through my needle. I leave a little bit of a tail, not the end of it. And then I actually like to bind left to right. So I just find a spot in my binding and I go under my quilt, under my binding, into my quilt. You don't want to go all the way through. And you pull your needle up through a spot in your binding right at the bottom there. And you just pull all your thread through. You give it a little tug, not too much so that your knot doesn't come through. And then where your hole is at the bottom of your binding, where you pulled your thread through, you just go back in there again and repeat the process. And I like to give it a little bit of a thumbnail length in between my stitches, only because I'm doing a mini quilt and we won't be using this on, our beds or our sofas. It's just going to be hanging. As you go, you can move your binding clips or you can remove them. Give it a little pulse check on the front to make sure I didn't go through the front. Sometimes that happens. You can also use a thimble if you want. I don't feel the need to use a thimble. It's just one extra thing that I don't need. Give that a good tug. And then I probably have one more stitch before I get to my corner. So let's go ahead and pull up one more stitch. Now when I get to my corner, I just want to make sure that my miter looks good and it's a little bit off, so I might adjust it. And I usually hold it in place with my thumb and then I go back under like I'm doing a regular stitch. And what I like to do is I like to capture this piece of the binding and this piece of the binding right there in that corner. Sometimes you have to bend your needle a little bit to get it in there. Boom, there we go, that looks good. Just pull that tight and then rotate your quilt. Holding everything in place again, you're going to go back into this piece of the binding right there in the corner and down through your layers, and then back up at the bottom of your binding on this side. Give it a little tug, and you've captured it. Now some people like to go the whole length of this miter here and do a little stitch here. Again, I don't feel like it's necessary if it's a mini quilt that's just going to be hanging, but if you're doing a full-size quilt that you would use on your bed or your sofa, I probably would secure that a little bit more. So we just keep going. Thumb space in between. Oh, and sometimes you have to be careful that your thread doesn't get caught in your binding clip. And there we go. And then I'll just keep moving my clips or adding more depending on what you like to do and bind around the whole thing. And when I get to the end, I just go in the back of my quilt so it's kind of hidden, wrap my thread around it, knot it, and cut it, and you're all good to go.